shows. So I'm probably gonna say a lot of things. If I don't say a lot of things, I'm gonna like be listening. But I'm definitely gonna bring up examples. I love this show. So.
Here's the thing about Bojack and Diane's most pivotal fight in BoJack Horseman. Head in the Clouds is one of my favorite episodes, and is one of the largest reasons why Season 5 is my personal top season of the show overall, due in part to Bojack and Diane's absolutely shocking argument near the end of this episode. It encapsulates so much about both of their characters, states how far they've developed, how far they have to go, and changed the trajectory of Bojack and Diane's friendship entirely. One huge reason for this squabble is that Diane and Bojack are trying to avoid and not address their own flaws, albeit in vastly different ways. Bojack by comparing himself to Diane and declaring them both as okay, as we see in his speech about Filbert. He states that Filbert and the book Diane wrote about him in Season 1 made him feel more comfortable with himself and helped him to realize that despite all his flaws, he is sympathetic, he is just like everyone else, and that means he's okay, and he doesn't need to change. But I do think Diane is correct when she states that he doesn't truly believe this statement. He wants to convince himself, as he has been doing for much of his adult life, that he is an irreparably bad man whose goodness slowly spilled out of him.
You know, sometimes I feel like I was born with a leak, and any goodness I started with just slowly spilled out of me, and now it's all gone, and I'll never get it back in me.
Who was tainted by his own genes.
Your father and I, well, you come by it honestly, the ugliness inside you. You were born broken. That's your birthright. And now you can fill your life with projects, your books and your movies and your little girlfriends, but well, it won't make you whole. You're Bojack Horseman. There's no cure for that.
Essentially, someone that cannot be changed, so there's no point in putting in the effort, and therefore I'm off the hook. And he uses these pieces of media to prop up...
Yeah, which what annoys me. Like, well, it makes it for his character, but, like, because I'm not saying I was rooting for Bojack a lot of things, but when he was doing good things, I'm like, there we go, Bojack. The rehab season, like when he was doing these good things, the church episode, the ending in Season 6, I'm pretty sure, when he went to the horse church, like it was so many good things that we saw from Bojack, and we know that he can do good, but he just it keeps on going back to this point. The point he just made, he keeps on going back to it.
That perception, fighting desperately to feel good about himself without needing to actually make any change in his lifestyle, reading past the intention behind what was written. I mean, when Diane asks him if he meant what he said about feeling okay about himself, he doesn't even really answer or know.
Did you really mean what you said before the screening? About how Filbert made you feel okay about yourself?
Oh, I don't know, I was just...
Because, you know, that's not the point of Filbert.
Again, he states that because he wants to believe it, it's a hell of a lot easier, but it doesn't really ring true deep in his mind. Not to mention that the only reason Filbert ended up becoming this character was because Diane felt the need to hold a mirror up to Bojack's face to help him realize that he is not, in fact, fixed. And yet, here, he is still parading the fact that Filbert has helped him to accept himself as he is and simply move on, not looking back, directly ignoring what Diane intended. Because Bojack still has a conscience, at the very least. Listen, he can be a narcissist, and his depressive tendencies are so oppressive that it seems like he doesn't at times, but he definitely has a voice in the back of his head telling him whenever he makes a horrible decision, telling him that he could do better, that he knows how to do better already, but he is actively choosing not to. I mean, we get a glimpse of this in Stupid Piece of Shit along with extended amounts of anxiety, but he clearly...
Like, that's a good episode too, because like you already explained, but it definitely shows us like what goes through his head, like, but why are you doing that? And it shows us why. And that's one of my favorite episodes too. I ain't gonna lie.
Does criticize himself and reflect heavily on all of these decisions. And he would do anything for that voice, that extremely distracting voice, to simply go away and for him to automatically feel good about himself, which is why he's holding up this front so vehemently and what ends up getting on Diane's nerves. You see, there's a big difference between moving forward with your life and just forgetting about the past entirely. There's a lot for Bojack in his past that he needs to unpack and examined to understand himself better, and to hopefully be able to avoid or control those tendencies if they do ever come up again in the future. It doesn't mean that he needs to sit in his house all day, punishing himself, calling himself terrible, because that's kind of how we got here in the first place. I feel like a lot of people think in extremes, where when someone says Bojack needs to hold himself accountable, the reaction sort of becomes, oh, so he can't live his life? He just needs to sit and punish himself all the time? No, of course not. There's a balance between this, and I really do think Bojack does find it in Season 6, even if he does relapse later on. He spends a lot of time discussing his past, reflecting on his own behavior, but he also still lives his life. In rehab, he finds happiness in gardening, yoga. He finds ways to relax.
I'm not expecting Bojack to go through all these extreme punishments because of what he did. I just want Bojack to change and realize what he's done. Like, Season 6 is the beginning of Season 6 is one of my favorites, and the end of Season 5. No, the beginning of Season 6 is one of my favorites, and the end of the church scene of Season 6 is one of my favorites too. It's one of my favorites because it shows that how Bojack can and what can happen if he does reflect on himself and does what he wants to do. Like, it really shows that. So you just have to punish himself. He could definitely just change in rehab.
He doesn't simply sit back and think one at a time about every terrible thing he's done. He reflects on them for a certain amount of time per day, resolves to learn from them, and uses them to help himself change, but he also finds time to simply enjoy his life, because he does deserve that as well. Everyone really does. And keeping a healthy mind and body is an important part of being able to make those crucial changes in the first place. Not to mention that this coping mechanism that Bojack employs contains a rather negative outlook on the world around him, and vindictive assumptions of the motivations of those he cares about, which would never actually satisfy him emotionally in the long run anyway. So here, when he simply declares that he resolves to put it behind him and just live, we all know that he is basically sentencing himself to misery in the process. Because that's not possible. What you've done is a part of who you are, and you can't avoid it, or the consequences of it on other people, but also your own psyche. The more you bottle it up, the more likely it'll erupt out in even more unpleasant ways, and result in even worse behavior, as it does here for Bojack later this very season. It's not a realistic coping strategy, so he ends up, of course, turning to opioids and alcohol to help avoid these emotions, because, again, this strategy is not necessarily working in any regard. And Diane avoids confronting this by distancing herself from Bojack and declaring them to be entirely different. This comes back from another moment in the season, in Int Sub, where Bojack outwardly tries to compare them as the same, but Diane has strong objections to it, and that is why she writes the whole New Mexico situation into Filbert in the first place, to show that she is not as awful as he has been, and to prove to herself that she is not similar to Bojack and isn't as damaged as he is, despite the fact that she also has a lot of work to do on herself still, as we see in Season 6. However, the funny thing to me here is that Diane is almost doing the exact same thing that Bojack is doing, propping herself up into a position to convince herself that she doesn't need to or can't change, and will always be this person that she currently is, feeling this current way. I mean, a couple episodes after this argument in the Season 5 finale, she states that she feels like a garbage fire all the time.
Do you have any idea how shitty I felt after you left?
So I made you feel gross, and now...
No! You didn't make me anything. I am gross. I feel all the time like a garbage fire.
But she isn't particularly making any effort to heal. In fact, she's kind of doing the opposite, sleeping with Mr. Peanut Butter. She thinks, in fact, that this is simply who she is, as Bojack does, and that she doesn't deserve to feel good about herself. And that is why she objects so strongly to Filbert's perceived message. It's not just about Bojack, it's about her too. Bojack accuses her during this argument of simply being outraged for the potential of her image being destroyed, but I truly do not think that that was the case for her motivation at all in this argument. Even if she was afraid of that, the point of the argument is to help Bojack realize that he is not doing well and to separate them, not to preserve her brand integrity or whatever. In fact, though, she sees a lot of herself in Bojack and is almost scolding a part of herself along.
She gets, because what Bojack said wasn't incorrect. They do have a lot of similarities, but those similarities is why Diane doesn't mess with it, why she distances herself. That's why I'm glad Diane didn't get with Bojack and Diane got with whatever this nigga name is. I forgot his name. I really don't care. But I'm glad Diane got with him because now I'm gonna know what his name is. Who did Diane? Guy. Nigga name is Guy. I can't remember that. Okay. Anyway, when she meets Guy and she like talks to Guy, I mean, Guy is the perfect nigga for her. I'm not saying that I like Guy. I mean, it is what it is. But she was better for him than Mr. Peanut Butter and Bojack because he helped her realize what she gotta do and told her, you need this, you gotta do this, you gotta calm down. So, yeah. I forgot his name. His name is Guy, and I forgot that. Jesus.
Wrong with him in this scene. It's also why she seems so overly interested in Bojack's life and what he's done, having done extensive research on his time in New Mexico and his bender with Sarah Lynn. It nags at her because they are fundamentally intertwined as people, for the case of this entire show, pretty much. More on that later.
Literally.
And it brings up a fear for herself that she doesn't want to admit, that if she continued that path that she was on before taking her antidepressants or admitting her own flaws, she might have harmed someone just as badly as Bojack had, like Guy. But at this point, she's still trying to avoid that is even a possibility. She even flat out states that she doesn't feel she deserves anything from Bojack when he says, oh, so you deserve to know what I've done? Like, Girlina, as a friend of Bojack, I think you do.
I need to find the best way to learn math and science.
It's brilliant.org.
What?
Deserve the truth, but maybe that's just me. I would want to know if my friend did something terrible. She also
I ain't gonna lie, Like, if me and Bojack are supposedly best friends, my nigga, and I found out something a different way, nigga, I want to hear it from you. What's going on? Like, what's happening? I would feel that way too. Like,
doesn't want to feel okay about herself, and she recognizes that she is not doing particularly well multiple times throughout the show, but resolved to simply continue forcing herself through it, not really believing that she needs to change. We get a really close-up view of all this in season 6 when she begins taking antidepressants. Before she decides to actually go on them, she expresses that she feels it's only a matter of time before the real her catches up and scares Guy away, as if her symptoms resulting from her depression and low self-esteem are actually parts of her own personality.
That was a good episode too for Bojack because he really cleaned up Diane's place and everything too. That was fire.
And even after she's on them in good damage, we see that she struggles to define who she is without that feeling inside of her, as well as her need to, quote, use that damage. And even declares at one point that she deserves to feel terrible after taking herself off antidepressants because, quote, she is terrible. She deserves to be punished in her own mind and ridiculed for her behavior, a common behavioral symptom resulting from depression, by the way. And by extension, so does Bojack, which is why his acceptance of everything that he's done from the message of Filbert bothers her so deeply, and she critiques him so intensely this episode, because she feels he needs to hear that, as she does. This scene also contains a really crucial moment where Bojack gives up on changing and hits the point of no return for his current struggles with opioid addiction. It's a large reason why this next episode jumps up to 11 in portraying how disoriented he is. This is the catalyst for that. Him giving up that small part of him that was clinging to the effort that he had been making for a majority of season 5, and then fully immersing himself in his addiction, basically causing the next episode to simply be a drug-fueled bender. I'm hesitant to say that this is Bojack's rock bottom, obviously, because as he says himself, you see a lot of things that you might think are rock bottoms in this show, and then things get worse the next season. But I will say that it does lead to one of his outwardly lowest points in the entire series, and that is because of him fully giving up this drive for change. The most difficult part of this argument is Bojack's just complete abandonment of any effort to change, which was one of the driving forces for his motivation this season in the first place. After he's felt so long feeling terrible about himself, hating himself for the things that he's done, he wants to simply move on, as the rather long process to improve wasn't dispensing the effects that he had desired. In fact, he was just sliding back into old habits anyway, as we see with his increasing alcohol consumption and failure to really stick by his system at multiple points throughout the season. And this wasn't his first try to change from his perspective either. At the beginning of season 2, he makes a big effort to become a better and healthier person, but ultimately gives up then as well, hitting a really deep rock bottom with Penny in Escape from LA. While we watch, we simply understand that Bojack isn't admitting the most crucial issues with himself, and that's why he continually slides back. But in his mind, he's tried as hard as he could to use his damage to reflect on himself and improve, and has simply repeatedly failed because he can't and the universe has it out for him. Like Diane, he thinks that this is it for him as a person. He is doomed to be a horseman, as his mother tells him in Brand New Couch. He even declares outwardly a couple times that he knows that he is wrong in this argument and that Diane is technically correct, and he lashes out at her when she's able to bring up examples that contradict this fierce front that he's putting up. But he's resolving here not to care anymore. He's done perceiving himself.
He's right, because this whole argument, he literally agrees with Diane. He agrees with her, but he's just done. That nigga just don't care no more. And once he saw Filbert as himself, it was just GG's. And the next episode really showcased that, because it showed that he couldn't tell the difference between both of them. He was going to work like he was himself. GG's in chat. So, I mean, yeah, this episode was good. This is a good video.
As something that needs to be changed in the first place, even if that pushes away or disgusts those around him, like Diane. In fact, he really tries to push her away here, since she's invading this perception and directly contradicting it, as he tells her that he doesn't need her help for changing, when that's really the entire reason he was drawn to her in the first place. But when she does leave, he realizes the gravity of her departure and sinks even deeper into that hole that he's been digging for himself, only forcing him to commit harder to that "I'm okay, there is no problem" facade that he's been trying to keep up, and is another reason for him going so far into his addiction right in the next episode. Like I said, this one scene is incredibly exemplative of Bojack's cycle of behavior throughout the series. He tries to put up a front, someone pulls it down, he pushes them away, then regrets it and sinks even deeper into a cycle of depressive tendencies. But ultimately, that front will never be enough for him, which is why this cycle continues to repeat itself over and over and over again. One thing this argument also highlights is Bojack's feeling as if he's the largest victim in everything that he's done, and stating that he's suffered the most from his own actions.
I'm the one who has to live with this shit.
This is
the one who has to feel guilt all day, every day.
So you're the victim here.
Yeah, and I know that's not the woke, progressive, intersectionally appropriate thing to say, but I would say, yeah, I'm the one who has suffered the most because of the actions of Bojack Horseman.
There's so many justifications in this argument that give you a peek into how Bojack would just move on from this if he resolved to, even though obviously, again, they would still stay with him forever. You can't just abandon things. That's not how it works. Where he states that most of the women don't remember, or that he was under the influence, or it was a long time ago. There's lots of little justifications peppered in there that show you how Bojack brushes, or will try to brush these aside when they come up in the future. It's an easy way to paint over the damage he might have caused and focus on his own issues and emotional problems as a result of all this time partying or being in Hollywood, rather than everything he's done to these people who probably do remember Bojack. He even declares that he's aware it isn't the woke or appropriate thing to say, which honestly, that term means something else entirely now. Knowing though that he shouldn't just abandon everything he's done and forget about all the harm he's caused, because he needs to face those harmful and destructive aspects of himself to be able to work on them and eventually become better. But he frames it as a cultural expectation, rather than something that will actually help your own emotional state and benefit yourself, as many other people nowadays do. Once it's woke, it's suddenly off limits for thousands of people to even consider. And it doesn't even matter who labels it woke anymore. Somebody can just say it, throw it out, and there it is, it's done. But again, Bojack is kind of showing, like, recognizing that Diane is correct in this argument, but still resolving to keep this front up and declare himself as not necessary of changing. Not to mention that this is a really revealing depiction of Bojack's narcissism and his mentality that creates that image of himself as a victim in the first place. One common symptom associated with narcissism and borderline personality disorder, for that matter, tends to be this perpetual perception of oneself as a victim, where blame is often cast off onto other people, no responsibility is taken, and the belief that the world is consistently working against them is firmly held in their mind. For most of the series, but this scene in particular, Bojack is struggling with a lack of control over how he sees himself, and how, from his point of view, no matter what he does, he always sinks back into these same depressive tendencies and continues to hate himself internally, beating himself up for every tiny action that he takes throughout the day, again, as we saw in Stupid Piece of Shit. This "I'm okay with myself" costume that he puts on is simply a way for him to cope and try and retain some control, in spite of of his overwhelming feelings of helplessness and failure in his efforts to change and better himself, or feel good about himself. Thus, he can simply avoid accepting responsibility and move forward resolving to not put in any effort to change at all. He will inevitably fall back in the future, so what's the point in trying? He's terrible, the universe hates him, and everyone's out to get him. He's the ultimate victim in this story. And when Diane attempts to contradict that view, he lashes out with anger and malice, which is also an extremely common reaction when that characterization of themselves as a victim is challenged for someone with that complex, especially since she's able to bring up an extremely visceral and extreme.
She was cooking that nigga. Diane was cooking, and she was letting him know what's really going on. That nigga struck a chord with that nigga.
Extreme example of the people Bojack has hurt, Sarah Lynn, the true victims of his own actions. He tries a lot of times during this argument to invalidate what she's saying and spin her words to make it seem as if she is selfishly trying to take him down, rather than trying to get him to admit culpability, even though he knows deep down that what she's saying is correct. I especially loved the part when Diane states that it must have been hard for him as the main character of this story.
Then, when she was sober, you took her on a month-long bender, and then she died. And she is dead now. And you're still alive with a girlfriend who is also alive, and a TV show. And that's been really hard for you, the main character in this story.
It's the writers almost recontextualizing a lot of what we've seen within the show, due to the misinterpretations of some audience members and some support from celebrities who are directly doing the exact same things Bojack has been doing and we are trying to teach people not to do. Showing that yes, we have seen Bojack suffer and sink into misery and beat himself up as a result of his actions, but we should in no way perceive him as the victim.
Yeah.
Here
it
is now.
Hi, I'm just trying to make sense of all this data.
Just get Sasvaya.
Sasvaya? No!
Oh, wow.
The quickest way from a billion points of data to a point of view. Sasvaya.
Can an oven-roasted turkey breast pack so much succulent flavor that the mere glimpse of it induces turkey sandwich day?
Of these.
So I was gonna say, yeah, if you should not watch the show and think that Bojack is a victim. No, his actions showcase that other people, like Sarah Lynn, nigga, he waited until it showed that he wasn't there with her. He was worried about his own self than about the care of his so-called daughter. Like, bro, really? He was about to sleep with a 17-year-old. Come on, gang. And he was doing that because her mom rejected him. Come on. Like, people on Reddit, I be seeing some people on Reddit be saying that too. Like, bro, no. Bojack is not a victim. He's not a victim.
Scenarios or of circumstance. He has made these choices resulting in these consequences and has hurt so many people around him in extremely destructive ways. Yes, of course, from all this toxic behavior and these broken relationships, his emotional state and self-esteem was in really terrible condition at the beginning of the series, but it doesn't make him a victim of what he's done. He is a victim of his own childhood,
yes,
for sure, but it doesn't excuse him of his actions later in life, even if he carried that mentality of being a scorned, hurt child with no control into his adult life. But he does have control. He is able to control what he does, and the consequences of his own actions, whether that be directly in the face of media or simply the repercussions of Bojack's guilt reverberating throughout his mind for ever and ever, neither of that makes you a victim of those situations, because once again, you were in control, you chose, and you must face those consequences. It also says a lot about Hollywood itself and how these pieces of media are perceived containing these problematic anti-heroes, where a lot of these characters end up becoming idolized by a portion of the fan base and used to justify, like, the worst kinds of actions. This show is creating and representing something extremely dark, and Diane was attempting to shed light on some very real toxic behavior, but the audience is not being conveyed those themes and is actively missing the idea behind the character.
Like, how do you relate to a nigga that went to New Mexico to try to steal somebody's wife. Like, come on, gang. You gotta chill.
Filbert, or at least Diane's conception of him. Even using him to prop up their own negative tendencies and avoid working on themselves in the process. I mean, there are so many people who do this with Bojack Horseman as a show itself. People who say that Hollyhock had no right to leave Bojack. Everybody should have stayed with him because they owe that to him. That Bojack isn't as bad as everybody says. He technically didn't do that many illegal things.
And the fact that people are saying that needs to watch the show again. Because I understand that it's perceived as he's the main character to sympathize for him. But with certain actions, my nigga, you're just weird. Like, I ain't gonna lie. Some actions should not just get you behind it at all. Now, I wish I could have read the letter that Hollyhock sent. I wish I could know what the letter said. But, I mean, we can pretty much infer what it was. My nigga, just cut him off. And we can kind of infer why as well. So, I mean, it was justification for that. We don't need to know the whole thing. I wish I saw the letter, though. Okay. But, I mean...
There's a bunch of light arguments that people come up with to try to justify Bojack's behavior and use that to perhaps justify their own behavior. But in reality, none of that was the intention of the writers, and if you really want to read into what they were trying to say with this show, you need to recognize that Bojack himself is not supposed to be a model for how to act, nor is he an excuse for you to continue to act like him, and to expect people to put up with that behavior. I mean, we even get a sense of...
A lot of niggas with it, I ain't gonna lie. Some of these, like Diane, Todd, oh my god, Todd should have been cut him off. But a lot of these characters put up with some of his stuff for so long, for no reason. Like, telling you, bro, Todd would have been cut him off. This is real life. Like, a lot of these people would not have been in his life at all.
Of this by the framing of the argument, where Diane and Bojack, even in this extremely heated and tense argument, work hard to keep up a facade around press and partygoers, still attempting to pretend like everything is fine on the surface. It's emblematic of how media can package and almost glorify this behavior at times without really showing the ugly underbelly of it all. Like Filbert, where then the audience misses the point and ends up taking Filbert as an example of how they should act, or that they are okay if they do act like that, and they should have people around them loving them and not expecting them to change or be better. But perhaps the most important piece of this fight is having us question, what is the purpose of Diane and Bojack's friendship? This fight really is an analysis of this relationship and what it means for both parties. And really, this friendship is the focus of the entire show. I mean, it begins with him meeting her and ends with them parting ways, presumably for good. We see how crucial Diane is to Bojack and how much her opinion of him affects his sense of worth. He pushes her away in this scene, but then almost immediately begs her to come back when she actually starts to leave. He needs her in his life to be able to do better from his point of view, even if this argument starts because her accusation of him not doing so sets him off. He won't admit what happened in New Mexico to her. He doesn't want to talk or reflect on the past, but he also can't bear to see Diane leave. Because for those with a victim complex, a savior is also often needed. Someone who will come along and change everything for them, despite them not working to help themselves. It leads to a lot of toxic codependency in both directions, and always leads to fights like this one, because the victim isn't willing to put forth any effort and continually exhibits the same toxic cycles, eventually pushing the perceived savior away again and again. Diane is not the only one Bojack does this to in this series, so... Yes, she does inspire him to do better, but mostly because she leaves here, not because she stays and continually props him up. She does, though, almost leave Bojack for good when he firmly states that he does not resolve to change and has decided to boast that he feels good about himself. She doesn't want this friendship to continue at all if Bojack isn't developing as a person. At the end of the series, when Diane finally does leave Bojack for good, she states that there are relationships that help you become the person that you are. She's in a good place, and she's learned a ton. Some of that from her time with Bojack, and she is thankful to him for those things that she's learned, despite the fact that he put her through a lot. But in the midst of this relationship, with the possibility of him not learning anything from her advice or companionship, she loses her sense of the value in the relationship. Because until then, all they've done is enable one another, whether that be in season 2 or even at the beginning of this season. Until Bojack makes...
That's it, because everything Diane is telling Bojack to do, Diane has learned from Bojack what his actions are, and she has developed her life. But it's the one way, because if Diane is telling Bojack to his face, yo, this is not good, you need to change. And that nigga's clapping back and trying to tell her that she don't know what she's talking about. Gang, that's it. GG's. Ain't gonna lie.
Makes another true effort to change by actually committing and going to rehab with her driving him and ensuring he follows through, even though they aren't on the best terms. They are still friends, though, and Diane cares about him and wants the best for him. She still wants him to be better, and with that possibility back, the friendship can continue, as she states with her friend from high school, Abby, who betrayed her, but she still cares for her, even if she will never forgive her for what she did. At the very end of the series, the difference is that Bojack has now put Diane through a ton of trauma. In the second to last episode, probably more than he has ever done before, and she needs to be able to prioritize her own happiness because it actually threatened her current relationship and that perfect future that she was building for herself. Plus, she's able to see that he's in a relatively good place and feels at least pretty comfortable with distancing herself. But that is not what Diane is doing or feeling in this scene. Diane is cutting Bojack off here like an infection. She knows that he is not doing well and is actively getting worse before her eyes, but resolves not to be dragged down with him because she knows that is entirely possible due to how similar they are. This relationship for her was always supposed to be about improvement, and first just for Bojack when she was writing his book, but eventually for the both of them. And when she sees that he has completely given up on that endeavor, she gives up on him. And that, I think, is why this argument shows so much about how Diane and Bojack's personality works, what their connection is about, and how they help each other grow by the end of the series as a whole. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you